There's a lot in all of our readings today, but today I just want to focus on really a couple lines in our reading from St. Paul. The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. In two short lines, St. Paul describes to us, on the one hand, the inescapable problem of sin under the law of the Old Covenant, and on the other hand, the radical newness of the New Covenant. And it's important for us to understand the distinction because it makes all the difference to how we understand and how we live the Christian life. So what exactly is St. Paul saying? The sting of death is sin. In other words, sin itself, not death, is ultimately what harms us. We can understand that idea. That's why Jesus tells his disciples, "Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but who cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body." So Paul is establishing here sin as the real enemy. But then he goes on, and the power of sin is the law. That's a bold statement, because the law was given by God to his people, ostensibly for the sake of their salvation. So how can the law give sin its power? What St. Paul is getting at, and what he explains further in his letter to the Romans, is that by establishing the law, God makes his people aware of their sins. Our hearts are wounded by sin already, and our actions flow from that wounded nature, sometimes without us even realizing it. And that means that by ourselves we can't avoid sin. From the store of evil in our hearts, we produce fruit that is evil. And so the moral law confronts us. It shows evil for what it really is, even if we weren't aware of it before. Because of that, as St. Paul says, sin in fact gains power from the law, in the sense that sin is no longer committed in ignorance. Under the law, sin is all the more deliberate. It's explicitly an act of rebellion against God. Now, that doesn't mean that God gives us his law in order to trap us or to make us worse. Quite the opposite. It's only by considering God's law that we realize how strong our need for redemption is. By establishing the law, God is trying to increase our desire for his salvation. But the law itself cannot save us because it can't change our hearts. And if our hearts don't change, then an exterior following of the law means nothing. The Pharisees tried the route of strict exterior observance, but we would hardly call them good examples. What we need first is an interior change, a change of heart, to the point that doing good and avoiding evil is no longer a task or a duty, but actually something that comes natural to us. Good deeds should constantly flow out of the store of goodness in our hearts. The law, of course, can't accomplish that in us. We can't win that store of goodness for ourselves. But thanks be to God, who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Here is the newness of the new covenant. Jesus doesn't just come to reiterate the law. He doesn't just come to expand the law. No, Jesus, by the merits of his passion, offers us the grace of true conversion. He offers to recreate our hearts so that the wound of sin is healed at the root, and so that we can live the law not by force or by sheer determination, but by the natural movement of our hearts, or better said, by the supernatural movement of our hearts. The law of Christ is love. Love sums up the whole law. Love is the new commandment he gives to his apostles at the Last Supper. St. Augustine describes the Christian life well when he says, "Love and do what you will." But that still leaves the question, how does God recreate our hearts? And what is our involvement in that? Because although conversion is strictly an undeserved gift from God, we do still have to cooperate with God's grace. We still have to say yes. And we do that simply by asking him for his grace in prayer, first and foremost through the sacraments, which are the established means of contact between us and God. In a sense, it sounds pretty simple, and in a sense, it is pretty simple. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you. But we have to know what we're asking for, and we have to be open to receiving it. And the difficulty we run into, interestingly, is that we tend to sell God short. The sacraments are so seemingly commonplace, so seemingly human, that we forget that God is wanting to act decisively in our lives through them. Perhaps especially at reconciliation, we forget what it is that God is offering us, and so we don't even ask for it. The fact is that every time we approach the sacrament of reconciliation, God offers us the grace we need to conquer the sins that we bring to him. It's not just a cleaning off of our record. It's wanting to be done with sin once and for all. We need to approach God with that desire and with the confidence that he can and will give us the graces we need to become saints and to bear good fruit in our lives. And the same goes for the other sacraments and for all prayer. St. James wrote to the early Christians in the same vein, "You do not receive because you do not ask. Ask then, and you will receive. Lord, make our hearts like unto thine."